Welcome to True Crime Threads, where we unravel the darkest secrets behind real-life mysteries. In today's case, a powerful judge's hidden affair leads to a shocking murder. Let's uncover the truth. Justice Arvind Malhotra had spent decades building an unshakable reputation. At 58, he was one of the most respected judges in the Mumbai High Court, known for his sharp legal mind and strict moral standing. His name commanded respect in the courtroom, and his rulings shaped the course of justice in the city. Among his peers, he was a figure of authority, a man whose decisions were guided by law and integrity. Outside the court, he maintained the image of a devoted husband and father, living in a luxurious apartment in South Mumbai with his wife Meera and their two grown sons. His life seemed perfect, structured, disciplined, and free from scandal. But behind closed doors, Arvind Malhotra had a secret, one that, if exposed, would destroy everything he had built. The secret had a name: Neha Kapoor. Neha was 24 years old, an ambitious law intern with dreams of making a name for herself in the legal world. She came from a modest background, working tirelessly to prove herself in a field dominated by those with influence and connections. When she secured an internship under Justice Malhotra, she saw it as the opportunity of a lifetime. Working closely with such a powerful figure could open doors for her career, and she was determined to make an impression. At first, their interactions were strictly professional. Neha admired the judge's intellect and experience, eager to learn from him. Arvind, flattered by her attention, found himself drawn to her enthusiasm and charm. He enjoyed their conversations. She was intelligent, quick-witted, and full of energy, a contrast to the rigid and controlled environment he was used to. What started as professional mentorship soon blurred into something more. Their meetings became longer, filled with subtle glances and lingering moments. He started offering her guidance beyond her internship, helping her with career advice and legal strategies. She, in turn, became someone he confided in, a refreshing change from the suffocating routine of his predictable life. As weeks turned into months, their relationship crossed a line neither of them had planned. Late-night calls, secret meetings, and whispered conversations became part of their reality. Arvind arranged private meetings in upscale restaurants, always careful to choose places where no one would recognize him. He booked hotel suites under false names, ensuring that their affair remained hidden from the public eye. For Neha, the relationship was intoxicating. She was involved with one of the most powerful men in the legal system, someone who could shape her future. The gifts, the attention, the feeling of being desired. It all felt like a dream. But the dream was built on secrecy, and secrets have a way of unraveling. Arvind knew the risks. If the affair became public, it wouldn't just be a scandal, it would be the end of everything. His family, his career, his reputation. One mistake could bring it all crashing down. He justified his actions, convincing himself that he could keep things under control, but deep down, he knew he was playing a dangerous game. The affair continued, hidden behind locked doors and carefully planned meetings. But no secret stays buried forever. What started as a passionate escape would soon spiral into something neither of them could control. And before long, the price of their affair would be paid in blood. Neha Kapoor had never been the kind of woman who settled for less than what she wanted. She had spent years fighting for a place in the legal world, pushing through obstacles that others with privilege never had to face. When she began her relationship with Justice Arvind Malhotra, she had convinced herself that she was in control. He was powerful, yes, but she had something over him. His desire, his trust, and most importantly, his fear of exposure. What had started as an affair filled with secrecy and excitement soon turned into something more complicated. At first, she was satisfied with stolen moments and whispered promises. The expensive gifts, the lavish dinners, the thrill of being with a man so influential it had been enough. But as time went on, she began to want more. She was not content being a shadow in Arvind's life, someone he only saw behind closed doors. She wanted a future, a place by his side, not just in his bed. Her demands began subtly, disguised as casual conversations. She asked him what it would be like if they were together in the open. What if he left his wife? What if they started a new life somewhere else? At first, Arvind brushed these ideas aside with gentle reassurances. He told her they had to be careful, that their time would come. But she was not a woman who thrived on empty promises. As weeks passed, Neha's frustration grew. She no longer wanted to be a secret. She began pressuring Arvind to make a decision, to leave his wife and take their relationship seriously. She reminded him of everything he had promised, everything they had shared. But Arvind had never truly considered such an option. Leaving his wife would mean public humiliation, a career in ruins, and the loss of the very identity he had spent decades building. The idea of such a downfall was unthinkable. He tried to reason with her, but Neha was not willing to be cast aside. Her anger turned into threats. She reminded him that she had proof of their relationship messages, photos, records of their meetings. If she exposed the affair, it wouldn't just be a personal scandal. It would be a national outrage. A high court judge caught in an affair with a young intern would make headlines across the country. His reputation would be shattered, his family disgraced. Arvind felt the walls closing in. He had spent years controlling the fates of others, but now his own future rested in the hands of a woman he could no longer control. He had always prided himself on being composed, calculating, and untouchable, but Neha's threats made him reckless. He knew she wasn't bluffing, and that terrified him more than anything. He started avoiding her, ignoring her calls, canceling their meetings. But Neha was relentless. If he wouldn't listen to her in private, she would make him listen in public. She began dropping hints, letting him know that she would not be ignored. Arvind felt the panic rising. His once perfect life was on the verge of collapse. He could not let that happen. And so he made a decision. A final decision. One that would ensure Neha Kapoor never spoke another word again. On the evening of August 17th, Neha Kapoor stepped out of her apartment dressed in a navy blue kurta and jeans, her handbag slung over her shoulder. She had told a close friend earlier that day that she was meeting someone important, someone who would change her life. She didn't mention a name, but her voice carried a tone of certainty. She had been waiting for this moment for weeks. Tonight, everything would be decided. She booked a cab to an upscale 5-star hotel in South Mumbai, a place she and Arvind had used before for their secret meetings. Hotel records later showed that a suite had been reserved under a false name, just as it had been many times before. Neha checked in alone, but she wasn't meant to be alone for long. The security footage from the hotel's entrance captured her walking in confidently at 8:12 p.m. She carried herself with the same quiet determination that had defined her all her life. But what the cameras didn't capture was the storm brewing inside her. This wasn't just another meeting. This was an ultimatum. Either Arvind committed to her fully, or she would make sure the world knew the truth. Hours passed. No one saw her leave. The next morning, when Neha didn't respond to calls or messages, her family grew concerned. It was unlike her to disappear without notice. They reached out to her friends, checked with colleagues, but no one had seen her. As panic set in, her father went to the police station and filed a missing person report. The police began their investigation with routine inquiries. Her phone records showed her last known location near the hotel, but her device had been switched off soon after she arrived. Officers visited the hotel and questioned the staff, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary until they checked the surveillance footage. The footage confirmed that Neha had entered the hotel that night, but there was no record of her leaving. As investigators combed through the hotel's security feeds, another discovery raised alarm. A little after midnight, a tall man in a dark hoodie was seen exiting through the service corridor. He was pushing a large suitcase, struggling slightly with its weight. Though his face was partially obscured, his build matched a familiar profile. The staff had not found anything suspicious at the time. Guests often carried large luggage, and no one had questioned it. The man had walked to the underground parking lot, loaded the suitcase into the trunk of a black sedan, and driven away. The car was traced to a rental agency. The name on the booking was fake, but the ID used for verification was not. The police ran a quick check and confirmed the worst. The identification belonged to Justice Arvind Malhotra. 3 days later, an anonymous tip led authorities to an abandoned stretch of land near a lake on the outskirts of Mumbai. A local fisherman had reported a strange sight, a black suitcase floating near the shore. The police arrived at the scene, pried it open, and found Neha Kapoor's body inside. Her wrists were bruised. Her neck bore the marks of strangulation. The medical report would later confirm that she had died the same night she had checked into the hotel. What had begun as a missing persons case had now become something much darker. The evidence pointed in one direction. The city's most powerful judge was now the prime suspect in a murder investigation. The discovery of Neha Kapoor's body sent shockwaves through the city. The media erupted with headlines about the young intern who had vanished, only to be found stuffed in a suitcase miles away. The details were chilling. She had been strangled, her body folded unnaturally to fit inside the luggage. The police now had a murder on their hands, and every clue pointed toward one man, Justice Arvind Malhotra. At first, the judge remained calm. When officers arrived at his residence to question him, he maintained his composure. He expressed shock at Neha's death and denied any involvement. He admitted to knowing her, acknowledging their professional relationship, but he dismissed any claims of a personal affair. He insisted that he had not met her on the night of her disappearance. His alibi was simple. He had been home with his wife. But the evidence told a different story. Investigators retrieved Neha's call records, revealing dozens of calls between her and Arvind in the weeks leading up to her murder. Some of them lasted for hours, others were just minutes long, brief but frequent. The last call she made before disappearing had been to him. It had lasted less than a minute. The hotel's CCTV footage provided even more damning proof. Though the man pushing the suitcase had hidden his face, his body language and movements were unmistakable. A forensic expert analyzed the footage and noted that the suspect had a distinctive way of walking, a slight hesitation in his right step. When officers compared this with older clips of Arvind, the similarity was undeniable. The police then traced the rental car used to dispose of the suitcase. The ID used for booking belonged to Arvind Malhotra. His signature matched. The car's GPS history showed that it had traveled from the hotel to the lake in the early hours of the morning. When forensic teams examined the vehicle, they found tiny traces of blood inside the trunk. DNA testing confirmed that the blood belonged to Neha. Under mounting pressure, Arvind's carefully built facade began to crack. He could no longer deny that he had met Neha that night. He changed his story, claiming that they had argued, that she had threatened him, that she was unstable. He insisted that he had left her alive in the hotel room and had no knowledge of what happened after. But Neha's autopsy report contradicted his claims. She had been killed within hours of entering the hotel, and the marks on her neck suggested deliberate strangulation. The pressure applied was methodical, controlled, consistent with someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The crime was not an accident. It was premeditated. The final piece of evidence came from Neha's phone, which had been recovered near the highway. Though the device was damaged, forensic experts managed to extract fragments of text messages. In her last messages, Neha had told a close friend that she was going to meet Arvind. She had sounded determined, convinced that this was the night everything would change. Instead, it had been the night she took her last breath. With the evidence stacked against him, Justice Arvind Malhotra was left with no escape. The man who had spent his life delivering justice was now at the center of a murder trial. The truth had finally caught up with him. The arrest of Justice Arvind Malhotra sent shockwaves through the country. A man who had spent decades upholding the law now found himself on the other side of the courtroom, accused of a brutal murder. The media frenzy was relentless. News channels aired endless debates, newspapers printed dramatic headlines. Arvind initially denied all charges, maintaining that he was being framed. His defense team argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that there was no direct proof linking him to the act of murder. But the prosecution built a case so strong that denial was no longer an option. The CCTV footage, the rental car, the call records, and the blood stains in the trunk, each piece of evidence painted a chilling picture of a man who had meticulously planned and executed a crime to protect his reputation. As the trial unfolded, the courtroom was packed with reporters, legal experts, and members of the public eager to witness the downfall of a man who had once decided the fate of so many others. The prosecution laid out the sequence of events, detailing how Arvind had lured Neha to the hotel that night under the pretense of discussing their future. They argued that he had no intention of negotiating with her. He had already decided she had to be silenced. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Neha had arrived at the hotel alive. The footage showed Arvind entering the building a little after 9 p.m. and leaving through a service exit several hours later, pushing a suitcase large enough to contain a body. The prosecution argued that after strangling her, he had carefully packed her body inside, using his position of power to move unnoticed through the hotel. He had driven out of the city in the dead of night, disposing of the suitcase in the lake, believing that the deep waters would erase any trace of his crime. But the suitcase had resurfaced, carrying with it the truth he had tried to bury. The defense struggled to counter the prosecution's case. At first, they attempted to cast doubt on the identity of the man in the CCTV footage, but forensic experts confirmed the gait analysis matched Arvind's known movements. They then suggested that someone else could have killed Neha after Arvind left, but the timeline of her death left no room for another suspect. When it became clear that he could no longer fight the evidence, Arvind's strategy changed. His lawyers argued for leniency, portraying him as a man who had acted in desperation. They claimed Neha had been blackmailing him, pushing him to a breaking point. But the court had little sympathy for a man who had used his influence to escape consequences for so long. After weeks of testimony, cross-examinations, and forensic reports, the verdict was announced. Justice Arvind Malhotra was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. The man who had once presided over cases with an air of superiority now stood before the judge as a convicted criminal. The sentencing was met with mixed reactions. Some saw it as justice served, proof that no one, not even the powerful, was above the law. Others viewed it as a tragic downfall, a brilliant legal mind brought to ruin by his own arrogance and desperation. But for Neha's family, there was no satisfaction in the verdict. Nothing could bring back their daughter. In the end, the case became a cautionary tale, a reminder of how power, when misused, can lead even the most esteemed figures down a path of destruction. The affair that had begun in secrecy had ended in blood, and the judge who once ruled over others had become the subject of his own final judgment.